This is the second video discussing the Anu case, and as you recall, Mrs. Anu Fateh Donaldson is an 80-year-old widow with 3 children, the eldest of whom is named Bash, short for Sebastian, the middle of whom is named Clara, and the youngest of whom is named Donald. And Donald, as you can see from this particular case study, is a bit of a concerning figure. This particular mini video is going to discuss the question of substitute decision making, whether by default or by power of attorney. We're going to look at this case study and see if there's any red flags that we should be worried about. So the first time we get to substitute decision making in particular, we see that Anu has fallen and broken a hip. And when she is in care and requires surgery, all the children attend to the hospital. And the doctor asks if any of them have a power of attorney for health and personal care issues. Or if you were in British Columbia, or in this case also Nova Scotia and Yukon, it might be a representation agreement. So they're asking, is there this substitute decision-making document in place which would allow somebody in particular to have been chosen by Anu while she was capable to make decisions now that she is incapable because of having fallen and broken a hip and being, at this point, medically unable to make decisions by herself. And at that point, we see that none of the children has a power of attorney for personal care. And so, as we've discussed in previous weeks, they end up going through the substitute decision-making list. And it's mostly the same in most jurisdictions. There's a little bit of difference farther down the list. But, first choice would be a spouse. And in this case, there is no spouse. And then it would go to adult children. In this case, there are 3 adult children. And we see that they are all equally ranked. And as we know, this means that they have to agree on what to do, or we get into some tug of war issues. It's not sort of a 2-to-1 vote in this case with 3 children. All 3 of them would have to agree. And in this particular case, they do agree. The next time, however, we see the need for substitute decision-making is upon her discharge. Anu needs to have some specialized care, and it means she needs to go to some type of institutionalized long-term care home for at least 8 months. And at this time, we're asked by the nursing home, does anyone have any substitute decision-making documents? Who will be paying the bills in this case? And the administrator, when they ask that, gets handed over 2 freshly drafted powers of attorney, one for property and one for health and personal care decisions. So these 2 documents are given together. And both of them are appointing the youngest son, the one who's a bit dodgy in this case. And these appear to be freshly done. Bash and Clara, of course, are somewhat concerned about that. And why are they concerned? Well, we'll need to see whether or not Mrs. Anu Fateh Donaldson had the ability, in fact, to make these powers of attorney documents or not. We saw that there weren't any when she was about to go into getting her surgery, and that post-surgery she had delirium, and she's unlikely to be able to make decisions at that point. And then there's this greater concern whether or not that she has some form of ongoing cognitive impairment, like a dementia, which the kids are worried about. So when we see that these 2 documents show up and that they must have been drafted quite recently, it does raise some red flags about whether or not she would have had the ability to understand and appreciate and appoint both of those documents. She may have been able to appoint maybe one, but not the other. So it may be that she was able to appoint somebody for health and personal care, or again, in the jurisdictions we've talked about, a representation agreement, but she may not, for instance, have had the ability to understand and appreciate the financial matter. Again, we may, but we know that it's a bit of a concern. We also see that it's been downloaded from the website. Now, quite correctly, it's been downloaded from the Ministry of Attorney General's website. And in many, many jurisdictions in this country, it's a perfectly valid power of attorney. In some jurisdictions, and I'll use British Columbia as an example, if you do have a power of attorney that's been downloaded, you may just see that you need to actually have some type of a greater authority on it if you're conveying property. It may be that the Land Titles Act requires that you actually have something with a lawyer's signature and notarized document on it. You'll have to check on your jurisdiction to see if a power of attorney for property needs to have some type of a greater authority than just being downloaded by the internet. We see that in this particular power of attorney that there are two witnesses, and it's just the witnesses seem to be two people who were random visitors to the hospital. But having said that, the face of it looks valid. So if it was downloaded from the internet, and if it was perfectly executed with the two witnesses in the presence of each other and in the presence of the signatory, and Anu was capable of understanding and appreciating, and she wasn't under any form of undue influence by Donald, then in this particular case, she would actually be able to have that power of attorney be honored and executed. You also just want to make sure that the two witnesses aren't excluded in some way. So it says here that they were passing visitors to the hospital. We want to make sure that they're not actually care providers. And in each jurisdiction, you may have an exclusion list which says who may not actually serve as the witness. Quite commonly, you couldn't have the person who's being appointed the attorney to be the witness, often their spouse, sometimes others close to them, or a person who is receiving money for care. Okay, and with that, we'll turn to our video number 3 on this, where we discuss some of the concerns about privacy.